My name is Dion, and I'm 31 years old. I was always the second choice in my family of four, living in the shadow of my older brother Travis. The defining moment came when my parents bought him a brand new sports car for graduation while telling me, "You'll never have that." Those words changed everything. That day, I made a decision that transformed my life in ways none of us could have imagined. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt undervalued by the people who should love you most. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, in a white colonial house with blue shutters that my father was immensely proud of. My dad, Richard, worked as a bank manager at First National Bank, always dressed in crisp suits and polished shoes. My mom, Margaret, taught English at the local high school, known for her strict grading and no-nonsense approach. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. But inside those walls, the dynamic was painfully clear. Travis was 4 years older than me, athletic, outgoing, and the center of my parents' world. His room was decorated with trophies, medals, and ribbons from various sports competitions. Meanwhile, my room felt like an afterthought, with hand-me-down furniture and bare walls. I often wondered if my parents had planned for just one child and I was the unexpected addition. The pattern started early. When Travis learned to ride a bike, Dad spent weeks running alongside him, cheering at every successful attempt. When it was my turn, I got a quick push the pedals and balance instruction before Dad had to rush off to watch Travis's baseball practice. Mom wasn't much different. She'd spend hours helping Travis with his homework, patiently explaining concepts while dismissing my questions with "figure it out yourself." "Dion, you're smart enough." She wasn't wrong about my intelligence, but her implication was clear. Travis needed the help. I didn't, so I didn't deserve the attention. My 10th birthday remains etched in my memory as the clearest example of where I stood in our family hierarchy. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, dropping hints about a small party with a few friends from school. Mom had nodded distractedly, saying, "We'll see, honey." The morning of my birthday, I woke up excited, rushing downstairs expecting at least a special breakfast. Instead, I found a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter. "Travis has a regional baseball tournament today. There's cereal in the pantry. We'll celebrate your birthday tomorrow. Love, Mom and Dad." I sat at the empty kitchen table, pouring myself a bowl of stale cereal, fighting back tears. Not even a present to open or a card to read. Just silence in an empty house on what should have been my special day. Later that afternoon, our elderly neighbor Harold knocked on the door. He was a retired business professor who lived alone since his wife passed away. In his hands was a small, neatly wrapped package. "Happy birthday, young man," he said with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I noticed your folks headed out early. Thought you might like some company." Harold sat with me in our backyard as I opened his gift, a book called Young Entrepreneurs Who Changed the World. It was the first time anyone had given me something that wasn't a generic toy or clothing item. It was as if he had seen something in me that my own parents couldn't. "You've got that look in your eye," Harold said as I flipped through the pages. "The same look my son Jackson had at your age. A mind that's always working, figuring things out." That afternoon, Harold shared stories of successful business people who started with nothing but determination. For the first time, I felt someone actually saw me, not as Travis's little brother, not as the afterthought child, but as Dion, a boy with potential. When my parents finally returned home that evening, Travis was buzzing with excitement about his team's victory. No one mentioned my birthday until I brought it up myself. "Oh, right," Dad said, looking genuinely surprised. "Tell you what, champ, we'll pick up a cake tomorrow." They never did. The next day brought another excuse, and eventually, my birthday faded into the background of Travis's baseball season highlights. School became my sanctuary. While Travis struggled to maintain C grades despite Mom's constant help, I excelled effortlessly. By 5th grade, I was reading at a high school level and completing math problems years ahead of my classmates. When I brought home straight-A report cards, Mom would glance at them and say, "That's nice, Dion," before returning to whatever she was doing. Dad would sometimes ruffle my hair and mutter "smart kid" before asking Travis about his latest game. I tried showing interest in sports to connect with my dad, joining the basketball team in 6th grade. I wasn't naturally athletic like Travis, but I practiced relentlessly. At my first game, I scored 12 points and felt a surge of hope when I looked into the stands. But there was no one there cheering for me. Later, I learned Dad had taken the day off to drive Travis to a baseball showcase 3 hours away. By the time I turned 13, I had stopped expecting my parents to show up or show interest. Instead, I channeled my energy into academics and my growing fascination with business and entrepreneurship, inspired by Harold's birthday gift years earlier. I started reading business magazines, following stock markets, and dreaming of starting my own company someday. When I shared these ambitions at dinner one night, Travis laughed so hard he nearly choked on his meatloaf. "You?" he sputtered between laughs. "Running a business?" My parents exchanged glances before Mom patted my hand. "Maybe something more realistic, honey. Not everyone is cut out for that world." Their lack of faith stung, but somewhere deep inside, it planted a seed of determination that would eventually change everything. By 16, I had grown tired of waiting for my parents' approval or support. While Travis was away at college, partying more than studying on our parents' dime, I found a job at Elaine's bakery 3 blocks from our house. Elaine was a tough but fair boss, a woman in her 50s who had built her business from scratch after her divorce. "6 a.m. sharp, Dion," she'd said during my interview. "I don't care if it's snowing, raining, or the apocalypse. Bread doesn't wait for excuses." For 2 years, I woke up at 5 in the morning, biked to the bakery in all weather conditions, and learned the value of hard work. My hands developed calluses from kneading dough, and my arms grew stronger from lifting flour sacks. More importantly, I was earning my own money, saving every dollar I could in an account only I knew about. Meanwhile, news of Travis's college exploits reached home regularly. He had joined a fraternity known for its wild parties and had already switched majors twice. Despite his mediocre grades and disciplinary warnings, my parents continued paying his tuition, housing, and sending extra money whenever he called with some emergency excuse. "He's finding himself," Mom would say defensively when I questioned why Travis needed another $500 for textbooks in the middle of the semester. When I wasn't working at the bakery, I started a small side business fixing computers for neighbors. It began when I repaired Mrs. Jenkins' laptop after her grandson spilled juice on it. Word spread quickly among the older residents in our neighborhood, and soon I had regular clients who trusted me with their technology problems. Harold, who had remained a steadfast supporter, was my first customer and biggest promoter. The boy's a natural problem solver, he'd tell anyone who would listen. Fixed my computer in 20 minutes when those big chain stores wanted to charge me $300 and keep it for a week. As my little business grew, I realized I needed to invest in better tools and parts to expand my services. One evening, I approached my parents with a carefully prepared presentation about my business plan, complete with projections and a request for a $500 loan to buy equipment. "I'll pay it back with interest within 6 months, I promised, showing them my meticulous records of earnings and expenses. Dad barely looked at my spreadsheets before shaking his head. "Dion, this is a cute hobby, but don't you think you should focus on school instead of these little projects?" "But Dad, I have a 4.0 GPA. This isn't distracting me from school. It's teaching me real-world skills." Mom sighed, setting down her coffee mug. "Honey, we just don't have extra money for this. Travis's fraternity is having some issues, and we need to help him with housing next semester." "What kind of issues?" I asked. The uncomfortable glance between my parents told me everything. Travis had gotten into trouble again, probably property damage during a party, and they were bailing him out. "Just focus on getting into a good college," Dad said, effectively ending the conversation. "Don't waste time dreaming about being some tech entrepreneur. That's not realistic for someone like you." Someone like me. Those words echoed in my head for days afterward. It was around this time that Harold introduced me to his son, Jackson, who was visiting from New York. Jackson had built a successful marketing agency from scratch, and now employed over 30 people. Meeting him was like seeing a possible future version of myself. Dad tells me you've got the entrepreneurial bug, Jackson said as we sat in Harold's backyard. He was in his early 30s, confident but not arrogant, dressed casually in clothes that I could tell were expensive without being flashy. I'm trying, I replied, suddenly feeling childish about my small computer repair service. Everyone starts somewhere, Jackson assured me, seeming to sense my insecurity. My first business was walking dogs in college, made $20 a day and thought I was rich. Over the next few hours, Jackson shared stories about his failures and successes, offering practical advice that no business book had taught me. Before he left, he gave me his card. Call me anytime you have questions. And remember, the people who tell you what you can't do are usually the ones who couldn't do it themselves. My relationship with Travis grew increasingly strained during his visits home from college. He seemed to resent that I was developing my own identity rather than living in his shadow. Still playing computer repairman? He'd mock whenever he saw me working on someone's laptop. Real impressive, bro. I'm sure the ladies love a guy who smells like thermal paste. One Thanksgiving break, Travis brought home his girlfriend Jessica, a sorority girl with perfect hair and a constant pout. At dinner, while I was telling Harold about a particularly challenging computer recovery I'd managed, Travis interrupted. God, Dion, nobody cares about your nerd hobby. Jessica and I are going to Europe this summer with some friends. Dad, we need to discuss the budget for that. I looked at my parents, expecting them to at least acknowledge the rudeness. But Mom was already asking Jessica which countries they planned to visit, while Dad nodded approvingly. The final straw came during my high school graduation. Despite being valedictorian with a full scholarship to State University, my moment was overshadowed once again. My speech was scheduled for 10 in the morning, but Travis had a semi-important soccer game at 11 in a city 45 minutes away. We're so proud of you, Mom said the night before, not quite meeting my eyes. But we might have to slip out right after your speech to make it to Travis's game on time. You understand, right? This scout could really be important for his future. I stood at the podium the next morning, delivering my carefully prepared speech about perseverance and self-belief to an auditorium full of families. As I spoke, I watched my parents check their watches repeatedly. They didn't even stay for the diploma ceremony, rushing out as soon as I returned to my seat. Harold was there, though, along with Elaine from the bakery and several of my computer repair clients. They cheered loudly when my name was called, and Harold took photos that he later framed for me. Their loss, he said simply as he hugged me after the ceremony. Some people can't recognize gold even when it's right in front of them. The summer after my high school graduation was a turning point. I had been accepted to State University with a partial scholarship that covered about 70% of my tuition. It wasn't my dream school, but with my savings from the bakery and my computer repair business, I figured I could manage the rest without going into too much debt. Meanwhile, Travis was graduating from college after 5.5 years, with mediocre grades and a degree in communications that he'd settled on after switching majors 3 times. Despite his academic performance being nothing special, he'd secured a job at Wilson Marketing, a firm where Dad's college roommate was a senior partner. My parents decided to throw a lavish graduation party for Travis at our house. They invited extended family, neighbors, and Dad's colleagues, transforming our backyard with catered food, a hired bartender, and string lights that Mom spent 2 days perfectly arranging. I helped set up chairs and tables, trying to be supportive despite the gnawing feeling that my own graduation had warranted nothing more than a hastily purchased cake from the supermarket. The day of the party arrived, and I dutifully played my role as the supportive younger brother. I mingled with guests, refilled drink pitchers, and smiled at distant relatives who asked if I was still in high school. Travis held court on the patio, regaling everyone with exaggerated stories of his college achievements, conveniently omitting the academic probation and the time Dad had to drive 4 hours to bail him out of jail after a particularly rowdy fraternity party. As the evening progressed, Dad clinked his glass to gather everyone's attention. His face was flushed with pride as he put his arm around Travis. Today, we celebrate not just Travis's graduation, but his entry into the professional world, Dad announced. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become, son. Mom stood beside them, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. I watched from the sidelines, trying to ignore the familiar ache in my chest. And because this milestone deserves something special, Dad continued, pulling an envelope from his pocket, we have a surprise for you. He handed the envelope to Travis, who opened it with an exaggerated look of suspense that suggested he already knew what was inside. He pulled out a car key with a familiar logo, Porsche. A collective gasp and murmur spread through the guests. Dad gestured toward the front of the house, and everyone began moving toward the driveway. I followed, a sense of dread growing with each step. There, parked in our driveway and adorned with an enormous red bow, sat a brand-new Porsche 911 in gleaming silver. It must have cost at least $120,000. Travis let out a whoop of joy, rushing toward the vehicle as if it might disappear. He ran his hands along its sleek contours before jumping into the driver's seat. Mom and Dad stood nearby, arms around each other, beaming with parental pride. I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. The partial scholarship I'd received would leave me with about $8,000 in tuition to pay each year, plus books and living expenses. I'd been planning to work multiple jobs while studying, carefully calculating how to make ends meet. And here my parents were, gifting Travis a luxury sports car that cost more than my entire 4-year education. After the excitement died down and guests began to leave, I found my parents in the kitchen, still riding the high of their surprise gift. "Can I talk to you guys for a minute?" I asked, working hard to keep my voice steady. "Of course, honey," Mom said, though she continued loading plates into the dishwasher rather than giving me her full attention. "I was wondering about my university tuition," I said. "I know my scholarship covers most of it, but I'll still need about $8,000 for this first year, plus living expenses." Dad leaned against the counter, his expression changing from celebratory to guarded. "What about your savings from that computer thing you do?" "I have some saved, but not enough for 4 years of expenses," I explained. "I thought maybe you could help with part of it, since you're helping Travis with." I gestured vaguely toward the driveway where the Porsche gleamed under the streetlights. Mom and Dad exchanged a look I'd seen countless times before, the one that preceded disappointment. "Dion," Dad said, his tone condescending, "Travis has a real career path ahead of him. The connections he'll make at Wilson Marketing could set him up for life. He needs to make the right impression." "And my education doesn't matter?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "Of course it matters," Mom interjected. "But you've always been self-sufficient. You have your scholarship. You're good at finding ways to make money with your little projects." "Little projects? I've been working since I was 16, saving every dollar I could while Travis partied through college on your dime." Dad's expression hardened. "That's enough. Travis earned that car with his hard work and dedication." "What hard work?" I demanded, years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. "His C- average? The 3 times he changed his major? Or was it the frat parties and spring break trips you funded?" "You watch your tone, young man," Dad warned. "I just want to understand," I persisted. "Why does Travis get everything handed to him while I have to fight for scraps of your attention, let alone financial support?" Mom slammed a plate down harder than necessary. "Because that's how it is, Dion. Travis needed our help to succeed. You've always managed on your own. So I'm being punished for being self-reliant?" Dad stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "You should be grateful for your scholarship. Do you have any idea what a car like that takes to earn? The years of hard work and sacrifice?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "You mean your hard work, not Travis's." "Travis has potential," Dad said firmly. "He just needed the right opportunities and support." "And I don't have potential?" The question came out smaller than I intended, revealing the insecurity beneath my anger. That's when Mom delivered the line that would change the trajectory of my life. "Honey, Travis just fits better in that world. He has the personality, the connections, the car suits him. You'll never have that. And that's okay. You can have a perfectly respectable life with your computers and practical career." The words hit me like a physical blow. You'll never have that. Not because I couldn't earn it, but because they didn't believe I belonged in a world of success and achievement. Travis fit their image of success. I was merely expected to be adequate. I left the kitchen without another word, climbing the stairs to my bedroom as Travis revved the Porsche's engine in the driveway for the 5th time that evening. I closed my door, sat on my bed, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry. When the tears finally stopped, I reached for my phone and called the one person who might understand. Jackson, Harold's son. They bought him a Porsche, I said when he answered, not bothering with greetings. Jackson listened as I recounted the evening's events, not interrupting until I finished with my mother's devastating assessment of my future. You know that's complete bullshit, right? He said finally. Their lack of vision isn't your limitation. What am I supposed to do now? I asked, feeling more lost than I ever had. What do you want to do? The question was simple but profound. For years, I'd been trying to earn my parents' approval and support. Every achievement, every responsible decision had been, at least partly, an attempt to prove myself worthy of the attention they lavished on Travis. But it had never worked. I want to leave, I realized aloud. I want to go somewhere where no one's comparing me to Travis or setting limits on what I can achieve. Then that's what you do, Jackson said. My apartment in New York has a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's yours if you want it while you figure things out. That night, after everyone was asleep, I packed 2 suitcases with my essential belongings. I wrote a brief note explaining that I needed space to define my own path, left it on my pillow, and slipped out of the house that had never truly felt like home. As I waited at the bus station for the first morning bus to New York, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of possibility, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would prove them wrong. Not for revenge, but for the scared kid inside me who had always believed he was somehow less deserving than his brother. New York City was nothing like Boston. It was louder, faster, and infinitely more intimidating. Jackson met me at the bus station, his confident smile a welcome sight amidst the chaos of Port Authority. Welcome to the jungle, he said, taking one of my suitcases. First rule: never make eye contact with people talking to themselves on the subway. Jackson's apartment was in Brooklyn, a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that was just beginning its transition from gritty to trendy. The spare room he'd offered was barely larger than a closet, with just enough space for a twin mattress and a small desk. But it had a window overlooking a courtyard with a single determined tree growing between concrete slabs, which felt oddly symbolic. It's not much, Jackson admitted, but the rent is cheap, and it's yours as long as you need it. My plan had been to transfer my scholarship to a university in New York, but I quickly discovered that wasn't so simple. Out-of-state tuition was significantly higher, and my scholarship wouldn't transfer. I would have to start from scratch. Reality set in fast. Within a week, I had taken a job as a barista at a coffee shop near NYU, working the 5 a.m. opening shift. The pay was minimal, but the tips were decent, and I could study during slow periods. By the second week, I'd added an evening job waiting tables at an Italian restaurant in Midtown. Between shifts, I attended community college classes, starting with basic requirements that would transfer to a 4-year university once I could afford it. The days were long, and sleep became a luxury, but there was a strange freedom in the struggle. For the first time, I was completely responsible for my own destiny. Jackson was rarely home, working long hours building his marketing agency, but he became my mentor in absentia, leaving business books on my desk with post-it notes marking important passages. On Sundays, his only day off, he would take me to breakfast and talk through my questions about business strategies and entrepreneurship. The degree is important, he advised over pancakes one morning, but what you're learning out here, hustling and balancing multiple responsibilities, that's the education that will really serve you. 3 months after my arrival, Jackson announced he was moving in with his girlfriend, and I would need to find a new living situation. Panic set in until he introduced me to Ethan and Nate, 2 computer science students at NYU who needed a 3rd roommate to make their rent affordable. Our apartment was a cramped 2-bedroom in the East Village, with me sleeping on a futon in what was supposed to be the living room. Ethan was a coding prodigy who spent most nights bathed in the blue light of his monitor, while Nate was a more social creature who brought an endless stream of friends and potential love interests through our tiny space. Despite the constant noise and lack of privacy, living with them expanded my world. Through Ethan, I deepened my knowledge of programming beyond the basics I'd learned fixing computers. Nate, despite his partying, was brilliant at networking and introduced me to a diverse crowd of ambitious young people. It was at one of Nate's impromptu gatherings that I met Sophia, a finance major with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. She was debating economic policy with a group of guys who looked increasingly uncomfortable as she dismantled their arguments. The invisible hand of the market isn't so invisible when you actually study who benefits, she was saying as I edged closer to listen. Later that night, we ended up sharing the fire escape, both seeking a moment of quiet. "You're not from New York," she stated rather than asked, her eyes appraising me. "Boston," I confirmed. "Well, technically a suburb, but close enough. And let me guess, you're another aspiring entrepreneur who thinks he'll be the next tech billionaire?" I laughed. I'd settle for making enough to afford a bedroom with an actual door. Something about my answer seemed to lower her defenses. We talked until sunrise, about economics, technology, and our families. Hers were Korean immigrants who had sacrificed everything for her education and expected nothing less than perfection in return. Different cultural background, same crushing pressure, she observed when I shared a sanitized version of my family dynamic. Sophia became a regular presence in my life, first as a friend, then as something more. She was brilliant, driven, and believed in me in a way few people ever had. On nights when the exhaustion of working multiple jobs while studying full-time threatened to overwhelm me, her unwavering conviction that I could succeed kept me going. By my second year in New York, I had managed to save enough to transfer to a 4-year college, still working both jobs to make ends meet. It was during an economics class that the idea for my first real business began to take shape. The most successful businesses identify a genuine need and fill it, our professor explained, preferably a need that current market solutions are overlooking. Looking around at my fellow students, many of whom were juggling jobs and studies like me, I realized there was an untapped opportunity. Students needed flexible work that accommodated their changing schedules, and local businesses needed reliable, short-term help without the commitment of hiring permanent employees. I began sketching out a platform that would connect students with local businesses for shift work, event staffing, and short-term projects. The idea consumed me. I spent every spare moment researching similar services, learning about app development, and refining the concept. Ethan, intrigued by the technical challenges, offered to help build the initial prototype. Nate, seeing the potential, began informally polling business owners he knew through his extensive network of contacts. Sophia brought her financial expertise, helping me create a business plan and financial projections that actually made sense. For 6 months, we worked in every spare moment, building a basic version of the platform. We named it ShiftLink and began testing it with a small group of students and local businesses around NYU. The feedback was encouraging enough that I decided to take the next step, seeking investment to develop a proper app and expand beyond our test area. The reality of pitching to investors was far more brutal than I had anticipated. Over the course of 3 months, I was rejected 17 times. The reasons varied. I was too young, the market was too niche, the technology wasn't proprietary enough, our team lacked experience. After each rejection, I would call Jackson, who had become something of a big brother figure to me. 17 no's just means you're 17 steps closer to a yes, he would say. Every major success story includes a chapter of rejection. The 18th investor was Abigail Bennett, a former tech executive who now ran a small venture capital fund focused on supporting diverse founders. Unlike the others, she listened intently to my pitch without interrupting. When I finished, she asked questions that showed she actually understood the problem we were trying to solve. I was a scholarship student who worked 3 jobs through college. She told me after our formal meeting, I would have killed for a service like this. I'm in for $50,000, but I want 20% equity and a seat on your board. It was a tough deal, more equity than I had wanted to give up, but her expertise and connections would be invaluable. I accepted. With funding secured, we rented a small office space, really just a room above a laundromat in Bushwick, and began building ShiftLink in earnest. Ethan came on full-time as our CTO, and we hired 2 more developers. Nate worked part-time handling business development, while finishing his degree. Sophia, still completing her finance program, served as our unofficial CFO, coming by after classes to review our books and financial strategy. 6 months into development, disaster struck. Ethan, burnt out from coding 16 hours a day, announced he was taking a job at Google. Without him, our development timeline would be derailed. That same week, our main competitor raised $10 million to expand nationwide. I spiraled into what Sophia later called my dark week, convinced that the business was doomed before it had really begun. I stopped going to the office, ignoring calls from our small team, and even Abigail. It was Harold who pulled me out of my funk. He had flown to New York at Jackson's request and showed up unannounced at my apartment. "I'm too old to climb these stairs regularly, so you better listen well the first time," he said, settling his 70-year-old frame onto our lumpy couch. "This moment right here? This is the fork in the road. One path leads back to being the boy whose family didn't believe in him. The other path leads to becoming the man who proves them wrong." His words cut through my self-pity. That night, I called Sophia and asked her to meet me at our office. Together, we mapped out a new development strategy. We would scale back some features, prioritize others, and I would learn enough coding to help bridge the gap until we could hire a replacement for Ethan. For the next 2 months, I slept an average of 4 hours a night, dividing my time between coding tutorials, business operations, and occasional classes. I dropped out of several courses, deciding that completing my degree would have to wait. The revised version of ShiftLink launched 8 months after our initial investment, servicing 3 university areas in Manhattan and Brooklyn. The first month was a disaster, with technical glitches and lower than expected adoption. The second month was marginally better. Then, in our third month, something shifted. Word of mouth began to spread among students, and businesses started requesting to join the platform rather than us having to recruit them. By month 6, we were processing enough shifts to break even operationally. 1 year after launch, ShiftLink was serving 5 college areas across New York City, with plans to expand to Boston and Philadelphia. We had grown to a team of 12 people, moved to a real office in Chelsea, and raised an additional $500,000 in funding, at a valuation that made my initial stake worth over $1 million on paper. I was 23 years old, a college dropout with a growing company, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. By the time I turned 23, ShiftLink had transformed from a scrappy startup into a genuine business. We had 50 employees working from our office in Chelsea, operations in 5 major cities along the East Coast, and a valuation of $5 million after our latest funding round. My life had changed dramatically from those first days in New York. I had moved from the futon in Nate and Ethan's apartment to my own 1-bedroom in a doorman building. It wasn't luxurious by New York standards, but having my own space felt like an incredible achievement. Sophia and I had been dating for nearly 3 years, supporting each other through the grueling demands of building careers in a city that never sleeps. She had graduated with honors and taken a position at an investment bank, working hours almost as brutal as mine. We didn't see each other as much as we wanted, but the time we did have was precious, filled with conversations about our dreams and plans for the future. One evening, as we shared takeout Chinese food on my small balcony overlooking the city lights, Sophia asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Have you spoken to your family at all?" I set down my chopsticks, feeling the familiar twist in my stomach whenever the topic arose. "No," I admitted. "Not since I left. 5 years is a long time, Dion," she said gently. "I'm not saying you need to forgive them, but closure might help you move forward." She was right, as she often was about emotional matters. Despite my success, the wound of my family's dismissal remained raw. I had buried myself in work partly to avoid confronting that pain. The next day, I finally worked up the courage to call home. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I guessed my mother would be home from school. The phone rang 4 times before she answered with a cautious, "Hello?" "Mom," I said, surprised by how thick my voice sounded. "It's Dion." The silence that followed felt eternal. "Dion," she finally said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something I couldn't quite identify. "Is that really you? Are you okay?" I'm fine, Mom. Better than fine, actually. I thought it was time to check in. What followed was a stilted conversation, both of us dancing around the circumstances of my departure. She told me Dad was still at the bank, but had been having some health issues, high blood pressure that the doctor was monitoring. Travis, she said, had been let go from the marketing firm 2 years ago and had bounced between jobs since then. He's having a tough time, she said, lowering her voice as if Travis might overhear, though I gathered he wasn't living at home. The economy's been difficult, and you know how sensitive he can be to criticism. I bit back the urge to point out that Travis had never faced real criticism in his life, at least not from them. What about you? She asked. Where have you been all this time? We tried to find you, you know. Your father called some of your friends, but nobody seemed to know anything. I gave her a condensed version of my life since leaving home, omitting both the hardest struggles and the extent of my success. I wasn't ready to share those details yet. I'm in New York, I concluded. I started a company connecting students with part-time work. It's going well. A company? She repeated, sounding genuinely surprised. You mean you own a business? Yes, Mom. I'm the founder and CEO. There was another pause, and I could almost hear her recalibrating her perception of me. That's wonderful, Dion. Your father will be so surprised. The way she said it made it clear that surprised was an understatement. They had never expected me to amount to much. Maybe we could see you, she suggested tentatively. We could come to New York, or you could visit home. It's been so long. I wasn't ready for that. Let me think about it, Mom. This was a big step, just making this call. Of course, she backpedaled quickly. Whatever you're comfortable with, just don't disappear again, okay? Despite everything, we do care about you. After hanging up, I sat at my desk for a long time, emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that they had missed me and regretted the way things had ended. Another part, the wounded boy who had left home with nothing but 2 suitcases and a head full of determination, remained skeptical. I called Sophia to tell her about the conversation. I don't know what I was expecting, I confessed. Some grand apology, maybe? Instead, it was like talking to a distant acquaintance. Relationships take time to rebuild, she reminded me. This was just a first step. Over the next few months, I exchanged occasional phone calls with my mother. They were always somewhat superficial, focusing on safe topics like the weather or general news. My father never came to the phone, though Mom assured me he was glad to know I was doing well. During one call, I suggested that perhaps they'd like to visit New York and see the company I had built. There was a pause before Mom replied. Oh, that would be lovely, but your father's so busy at the bank right now, and I've taken on extra tutoring hours. Perhaps another time? It was the same pattern as always, just with more polite excuses. They still couldn't make time for me or my achievements. The realization was both painful and liberating. I decided then to stop seeking their approval or recognition. I would maintain basic contact out of respect for the family connection, but my energy and emotional investment would go toward the people who had actually supported me. Sophia, Jackson, Harold, and the team I'd built at ShiftLink. With this resolution, I threw myself even more completely into growing the company. We expanded to Chicago and Miami, doubled our tech team, and began developing more sophisticated algorithms to better match students with appropriate opportunities. As we approached our 5th anniversary, ShiftLink had become the leading platform of its kind on the East Coast, with over 200,000 students and 15,000 businesses using our service. Our revenue had grown exponentially, and we were finally consistently profitable. It was around this time that I received an unexpected email from William Hayes, the founder of Job Connect, one of the largest employment platforms in the country. He wanted to meet to discuss potential synergies between our companies. Sophia helped me prepare for the meeting, running through possible scenarios and coaching me on negotiation tactics. Remember, you've built something valuable, she emphasized. Don't let them intimidate you with their size or resources. The meeting took place at an upscale restaurant in Midtown. William Hayes was in his 50s, with silver hair and the confident demeanor of someone used to getting his way in business dealings. "I'll cut to the chase," he said after we'd ordered. "Your platform has impressive penetration in the college market, a demographic we've struggled to capture effectively. We're interested in acquiring ShiftLink to integrate into our broader service offering." He named a figure that made me nearly choke on my water. $30 million. "I'd need to discuss this with my team and investors," I managed to say, maintaining a composed exterior, despite my racing heart. "Of course," he nodded. "Take a week to consider, but know that this offer won't be on the table indefinitely." The decision wasn't easy. ShiftLink was my creation, my redemption story, the proof that my parents had been wrong about me. Selling felt like giving up a part of my identity. I consulted with Abigail, who had become a trusted advisor. "Sometimes the greatest entrepreneurial skill is knowing when to exit," she counseled. "This offer values the company fairly, and the resources of Job Connect could help your platform reach many more students than you could on your own." After days of deliberation, discussions with my team, and many late-night conversations with Sophia, I accepted the offer. The terms included a 2-year transition period where I would continue to lead ShiftLink as a division of Job Connect, ensuring our mission and culture weren't lost in the acquisition. When the deal closed, my share after paying investors and setting aside equity for my team came to just over $12 million. At 25, I had become a millionaire many times over. To celebrate, I took Sophia on a vacation to Italy, a country we'd both always wanted to visit. On our last evening, sitting on the terrace of a villa overlooking the Amalfi Coast, I proposed. The ring was elegant but not ostentatious, much like Sophia herself. "Yes," she said simply, her eyes shining with tears. 1,000 times yes. As we sipped champagne under the Italian stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced before. The angry, hurt young man who had left Boston 5 years earlier had transformed into someone I was proud to be. For the first time, I was excited about the future, not because of what I had to prove, but because of what I wanted to build, and who I wanted to build it with. 4 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. After completing my 2-year commitment with Job Connect, I had used my experience and capital to launch a venture capital firm specializing in startups founded by people from underrepresented backgrounds. We called it Outsider Ventures, a nod to my own journey as someone who had succeeded despite being told I didn't belong. The firm had quickly built a reputation for not just providing funding, but also mentorship and connections to founders who typically struggled to access traditional venture capital networks. We had invested in 27 companies across various sectors, from healthcare technology to sustainable agriculture, and our portfolio was performing exceptionally well. Sophia had left her banking position to join me as a partner, bringing her sharp financial acumen and strategic thinking to our investment decisions. We had married in a small ceremony, attended by our closest friends, including Jackson and Harold, who at 77 insisted on dancing until midnight. Our life together had settled into a comfortable rhythm of work and leisure. We had purchased a penthouse apartment in Tribeca, with views of the Hudson River, and a weekend home in the Catskills, where we could escape the city's intensity. While we weren't flashy with our wealth, we enjoyed the freedom it provided to live and work on our own terms. One indulgence I had allowed myself was the purchase of a private jet, a Gulfstream G650. The decision wasn't made lightly, but as our investments required increasingly frequent travel across the country and internationally, it made practical sense. More importantly, perhaps, it represented a final, tangible symbol of how far I had come from the boy who had been told he would never have that. It was this aircraft that led to the most unexpected reunion of my life. I was returning from a series of meetings with portfolio companies in California, landing at a private airfield outside Chicago where we needed to refuel before continuing to New York. While the plane was being serviced, I decided to stretch my legs in the small terminal building. The facility was modest, primarily serving business travelers and the occasional celebrity passing through. As I walked toward the coffee shop, a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. "Dion? Dion Fitzgerald? Is that you?" I turned to find Travis standing a few feet away, looking both shocked and uncomfortable. He was dressed in a department store suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, suggesting he had lost weight since it was purchased. His hair was thinning at the temples, and fine lines had formed around his eyes, making him look older than his 35 years. "Travis," I replied, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing in Chicago?" He gestured vaguely toward the main terminal. "Insurance conference. I'm working for Allstate now. Been there about 8 months." His eyes darted past me to where the Gulf Stream sat visible through the large windows. "Is that? Are you on a private flight?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "Yes," I answered simply, not elaborating. An awkward silence stretched between us, years of unspoken history creating an almost physical barrier. "You look good," he finally said, his eyes taking in my tailored suit and confident posture. "Mom mentioned you were doing well in New York, but she didn't say." "How's she doing?" I asked, deliberately changing the subject. "And Dad?" "They're okay. Dad retired last year. His blood pressure got pretty bad for a while, but he's doing better now." Travis shifted uncomfortably. "Mom still tutors a few students, mostly to stay busy." He hesitated, then added, "They talk about you sometimes, wondering how you're really doing. The calls with Mom are pretty short, from what she says." I nodded, unsure how to respond. My relationship with my parents had remained distant, limited to brief phone calls on holidays and birthdays. Travis's gaze kept returning to the Gulf Stream. "So what exactly do you do now?" Mom was pretty vague about it. "I run a venture capital firm. We invest in startups." His eyebrows rose. "Venture capital? Like millions of dollars kind of investments?" "Sometimes, yes." The look on his face changed from surprise to something darker, a mixture of envy and bitterness I recognized all too well. "Must be nice," he muttered. "Some people just get all the luck." The comment struck me as so profoundly ironic that I almost laughed. Travis, who had been given every advantage, every opportunity, who had received a Porsche while I received discouragement, was accusing me of being lucky. Before I could respond, Travis pulled out his phone. "You know what? I need to call Mom. She needs to hear about this." To my astonishment, he dialed right there in front of me, putting the phone on speaker as if wanting me to hear. "Mom," he said when she answered. "You'll never guess who I just ran into at the airport. Dion." "Dion?" My mother's voice sounded thin and surprised through the phone speaker. "How is he?" "Oh, he's great," Travis replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "He flew in on a private jet." "A private jet, Mom? How did he get that?" The last part came out as an almost childish wail, loud enough that several people in the terminal turned to look at us. There was silence on the other end of the line before my mother's voice returned. Quieter now. "Travis, are you sure?" "I'm staring right at it. It's got some company name on the side." "What was it again?" He looked at me expectantly. "Outsider Ventures," I supplied, feeling strangely calm despite the surreal situation. "Outsider Ventures," Travis repeated into the phone. "Apparently little brother runs a venture capital firm now, invests millions in companies. Meanwhile, I'm sharing a hotel room with Gary from the Peoria office to save on the conference budget." The bitterness in his voice was so raw, it was almost painful to witness. "Travis, please calm down," my mother urged. "We can discuss this when you get home." "Discuss what?" Travis demanded. "Discuss how you and Dad always said I was the one with the bright future? How you bought me that car because I deserved it? Well, look at us now." I could hear my mother trying to soothe him, but Travis had worked himself into a state of agitated resentment. After a few more exchanges, he hung up abruptly, turning back to me with reddened eyes. "Must feel good," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Coming back like this, showing everyone how wrong they were about you." Something in his expression, the genuine pain behind the hostility, made me soften. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong, Travis. It was about proving something to myself. He scoffed, but I could see my words had landed somewhere. "Look," I continued, "my plane will be ready to leave in about an hour. Why don't you come aboard? We can talk properly." Travis hesitated, pride visibly wrestling with curiosity. "Why would you want that? So you can rub your success in my face some more?" "No," I said sincerely. Because despite everything, you're still my brother. After a moment's consideration, Travis nodded stiffly. Aboard the Gulfstream, seated in the plush leather seats with drinks in hand, the facade Travis had been maintaining began to crumble. I've made such a mess of my life, he admitted, staring into his whiskey. Nothing ever worked out the way Mom and Dad said it would. The marketing job? I got fired after 2 years for missing deadlines. Then it was one mediocre position after another. I listened as he detailed his professional disappointments, failed relationships, and growing sense of inadequacy. The golden child had discovered that the real world didn't grade on the curve his parents had established. The worst part, he continued, his voice dropping, is that after you left and started doing well, they changed. They started comparing me to you. Why can't you be more focused like your brother? Dion built a whole company, and you can't even keep a job for a year? The irony wasn't lost on me. That must have been difficult, I said, genuinely sympathetic. It was a complete mindfuck, Travis said bluntly. My whole life, they told me I was the special one, the one with potential. Then suddenly, you're the standard I can't live up to. As Travis talked, my phone rang. Looking at the screen, I saw it was my father calling, undoubtedly having heard from my mother about the encounter. I should take this, I told Travis, who nodded with resignation. Dion. My father's voice was hesitant, lacking the confidence I remembered. Your mother told me you ran into Travis. Yes, we're actually talking right now, I replied. She also mentioned, a private jet? That's correct. There was a pause. I think we need to talk, son. Really talk, as a family. Would you be willing to come home for a visit? It was the first time in nearly a decade that my father had directly asked me to return home. The request hung in the air, weighted with unspoken apologies and regrets. I'll think about it, I said finally. But I need to know it would be different this time. It would, he assured me quickly. We've changed, Dion. Seeing how you've succeeded despite how we treated you. We've had to do a lot of soul-searching. After ending the call, I turned back to Travis, who was watching me with a complex expression. They want you to come home, don't they? He guessed. I nodded. Are you going to go? It was a question I had been asking myself from the moment I recognized Travis in the terminal. Was I ready to revisit the source of so much pain? Was there any point in reopening those old wounds? Looking at my brother, seeing the genuine vulnerability beneath his resentment, I made my decision. Yes, I said. I think it's time. 1 month after my unexpected reunion with Travis, Sophia and I landed in Boston with our 2-year-old son, Leo. The decision to bring Leo to meet his grandparents for the first time had been difficult. Part of me wanted to shield him from people who had rejected me, but Sophia gently reminded me that healing sometimes requires taking risks. This is as much for you as it is for them, she said as our rental car approached the familiar neighborhood where I'd grown up. Whatever happens today, we'll face it together. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The blue shutters faded to a pale periwinkle. The front yard, once Dad's pride with its meticulous landscaping, showed signs of neglect, with overgrown shrubs and patchy grass. Ready? Sophia asked, squeezing my hand after we'd parked in the driveway. I nodded, though the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. Mom opened the door before we could ring the bell. She had aged considerably in the decade since I'd last seen her, her once dark hair now completely gray, deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth. She stood frozen for a moment, taking in the sight of us, her eyes filling with tears. You came, she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make us disappear. Her gaze moved to Leo, who was half hidden behind Sophia's legs. And this must be your grandson, I confirmed. Leo, this is your grandmother. Mom pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome with emotion. Behind her, Dad appeared in the hallway, looking thinner and frailer than the imposing figure of my childhood. His hair had receded significantly, and he moved with a slight stoop that hadn't been there before. Dion, he said, his voice rough. Thank you for coming. The initial moments were awkward, filled with tentative hugs and careful small talk. We moved to the living room, where I noticed several of my academic awards from high school had been framed and displayed prominently. something that had never happened when I actually lived there. Travis arrived shortly after us, having driven in from his apartment in a neighboring town. He seemed more composed than he had been at the airport, greeting Sophia warmly and getting down on one knee to introduce himself to Leo. Over lunch, which Mom had prepared with obvious effort, the conversation remained superficial until Leo needed a nap, and Sophia offered to take him upstairs to my old bedroom, which Mom had prepared with a portable crib. Once they were gone, the air in the dining room grew heavy with unspoken words. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room," I finally said. "The last time we were all together in this house, you bought Travis a Porsche and told me I'd never have what he had." Mom flinched as if I'd physically struck her. Dad's gaze dropped to his plate. "We were wrong," Dad said simply, looking up to meet my eyes directly. "So terribly wrong, and not just about that car. About everything. We thought we were doing what was best," Mom added, her voice trembling. "Travis seemed to need more support, more encouragement. You were always so self-sufficient, so capable. So you punished me for it," I stated flatly. "Yes," Dad admitted, surprising me with his directness. "That's exactly what we did, though we didn't see it that way then. We gave Travis everything because we thought he needed it to succeed. We gave you nothing because we thought you'd be fine regardless." Travis shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "They set me up to fail, Dion," he said quietly, "by never letting me struggle or solve my own problems, by making me believe I was entitled to success without working for it. It was a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected from my brother. After you left," Mom continued, "we were so angry at first. How dare you walk away from the family, we thought. But as years passed and we saw you building something remarkable on your own, while Travis struggled despite all our help," she trailed off, tears streaming down her face. "We had to face some hard truths about ourselves," Dad finished for her, "about the damage we'd done to both our sons, in different ways." For a moment, no one spoke, the weight of decades of dysfunction settling around us. "I didn't come here for apologies," I finally said. "I came because I need to move forward, and that means addressing the past rather than running from it." "What can we do?" Mom asked, wiping at her tears. "To make things right?" "You can't make it right," I said honestly. "We can't go back and change what happened, but we can decide what kind of relationship we want going forward, with clear boundaries and expectations." Dad nodded slowly. "That's fair. More than fair, considering everything. I want Leo to know his grandparents," I continued. "But I need to know he'll be valued for who he is, not compared to others or measured against some arbitrary standard." "We would never," Mom began, then stopped herself. "We will do better, with both of you, and with Leo." Travis had been quiet for most of the conversation, but now he leaned forward. "There's something I need to say too," he addressed me directly. "I was jealous when I saw you at the airport with that plane, but I was also proud. Proud that my little brother had accomplished so much, even though everyone, including me, told him he couldn't." His sincerity caught me off guard. The brother who had mocked my ambitions and belittled my efforts was acknowledging my success without resentment. "I've been thinking a lot since Chicago," Travis continued, "about how I've been blaming everyone else for my failures. Mom and Dad for spoiling me, you for making me look bad by comparison, the economy, bad bosses, whatever. But the truth is, I never really tried, not the way you did." "It's not too late to start," I told him. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," Travis said. "I don't want handouts or charity, but I could use some guidance, some real mentorship about how to build something meaningful." It was the last thing I had expected from this reunion, my brother asking for my help rather than my parents'. "I'd be happy to," I found myself saying, realizing I meant it. "But I should warn you, I'm a demanding mentor. Just ask any of the founders in our portfolio." For the first time that day, the tension in the room broke as Travis laughed. I would expect nothing less from the overachiever of the family. As the afternoon progressed into evening, we began the delicate process of redefining our family relationships. It wasn't perfect or complete, but it was a beginning. Before we left, Dad took me aside while Mom and Sophia were cooing over Leo, who had woken from his nap. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and serious. The day you left, after finding your note, I was furious. I said terrible things about you, convinced myself you were being ungrateful and dramatic. He paused, gathering himself. 3 years later, when news of your first company's success reached us, I realized the magnitude of what we had done. We had a brilliant, determined son, and instead of nurturing that, we crushed it at every opportunity. His eyes, so similar to my own, filled with tears. I don't expect forgiveness, Dion, but I want you to know that my greatest regret in life is not seeing who you really were when it mattered most. The raw honesty of his confession moved me more than any apology could have. I did forgive you, Dad, I told him. Years ago. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying that anger was weighing me down, keeping me tethered to the past. He nodded, understanding. You're a better man than I ever was. No, I corrected him gently. Just a different one. The drive back to our hotel that evening was quiet, both Sophia and I lost in our own thoughts. Leo had fallen asleep in his car seat, his peaceful face illuminated occasionally by passing streetlights. What are you thinking? Sophia finally asked, her hand resting lightly on my arm. About healing, I replied. How it's rarely the dramatic, cathartic moment we imagine. It's messy and incomplete and ongoing. She nodded. Are you glad we came? Yes, I said after a moment's reflection. Not because everything is fixed, but because I'm no longer defined by their rejection. That part of my story is just that, a part, not the whole. In the weeks and months that followed, we established a new, cautious relationship with my parents. They visited us in New York, marveling at our home and the life we had built. I helped Travis develop a business plan for a consulting firm focused on helping small businesses implement effective insurance strategies, combining his industry knowledge with my entrepreneurial experience. The most profound change, however, was within myself. The wounded young man who had left Boston with nothing but determination had finally made peace with his origins. The words, "You'll never have," that no longer echoed in my mind during moments of accomplishment or doubt. I channeled this healing into creating a scholarship program through Outsider Ventures, specifically designed for students who, like me, had the drive and talent but lacked family support or resources. The Outsider Scholarship provided not just financial assistance but mentoring and internship opportunities. At the inaugural scholarship ceremony, standing before 20 bright-eyed recipients who reminded me so much of myself at that age, I shared my story publicly for the first time. The most valuable lesson I've learned, I told them, is that other people's limitations are not your reality. When someone says you can't do something, they're telling you about their boundaries, not yours. As I looked out at those young faces, full of hope and determination despite the obstacles they had already faced, I felt the final piece of my own healing fall into place. The words that had once driven me from my home had ultimately driven me to create something meaningful, not just for myself, but for others who needed to know their worth wasn't determined by those who should have valued them most. Sometimes, rejection becomes our greatest redirection. Sometimes, the words "you'll never have" that become the very fuel that propels us to heights even we couldn't imagine. But the true success isn't in proving others wrong. It's in living fully aligned with your own potential and purpose. Have you ever experienced someone underestimating you or telling you that you couldn't achieve something? How did you respond to that challenge? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of transformation, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder of their own incredible potential. Remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's perceptions, and sometimes the greatest achievements grow from the soil of doubt and dismissal. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and until next time, believe in yourself, even when no one else does.